Now, I started that question by saying, as Chancellor,
Indeed.
do you think you're going to be sacked?
No, I'm sure I'm not going to be sacked because I'm going to resign before we get to that point. I intend,
Really?
assuming that Boris Johnson becomes the next Prime Minister, I understand that his conditions for serving in his government would include accepting a no-deal exit on the 31st of October. That is not something I could ever sign up to. It's very important that a Prime Minister is able to have a Chancellor who is closely aligned with him in terms of policy, and I therefore intend to resign to Theresa May before she goes to the palace to tender her own resignation on Wednesday.
I can never remember a Chancellor of the Exchequer, or indeed another senior minister, announcing his resignation live on national television. A moment, I suppose. But can I ask?
It's a first, Andrew.
Can I ask you, when it comes to Theresa May's final Prime Minister's questions on Wednesday, will you be sitting on the front bench or the back benches?
I'll be sitting on the front bench. I intend to resign after Prime Minister's questions, before the Prime Minister goes to the palace.
And you mentioned Boris Johnson now, but what about Jeremy Hunt? Because he could possibly surprise everybody and win this too. Same applies?
Well, that might be more complicated because Jeremy's position is more nuanced, and I haven't heard him express clearly a requirement for a sort of loyalty pledge around the 31st of October no deal exit. But look, all the polling, all the bookmakers suggest that Boris Johnson will win. The question is by how much. And I think that is what is likely to happen, and I'm making my plans accordingly. But of course, I'll wait until Tuesday to see for sure.
You're making your plans accordingly. We've seen in the paper your bags are packed. Have you effectively left number 11 for the last time?
No, I shall be. I'm sorry to disappoint whichever newspapers paid however much for that photograph, but that was me heading out on Saturday morning, as I often do, to my home in Surrey, and I shall be heading back tomorrow morning with my same suitcase, and I shall be staying in Downing Street Monday night and Tuesday night.
Who did you vote for in the leadership contest?
I'm not going to tell you.
All right, but I think we can probably gather you're not Boris Johnson's biggest supporter, perhaps.
Well, look, it's nothing personal. I've always got on very well with Boris, and I find him a very engaging character. And actually, beyond the Brexit question, I don't have major policy disagreements with him. He's a middle-of-the-road conservative, a liberal conservative, I would say. So it's simply about a disagreement on Brexit policy, and I cannot accept the idea of leaving with no deal on October 31st. Both candidates have said that they want to get a deal, and I will support them so long as they are genuinely pursuing a deal. But you cannot get a deal by October 31st just because of the circumstances. Parliament will be largely in recess between now and then. The new European Commission doesn't officially take office until the 1st of November. There are a whole set of events that conspire against getting a deal before 31st of October. So a genuine pursuit of a deal will require a little longer, and I understand that the Europeans are signalling that they would be prepared to allow a technical extension. And I think what the new Prime Minister should do is go to Brussels soon, have a preliminary discussion to see whether there is scope for being able to work together. And if he thinks there is, then he should accept the offer of a technical extension to allow that discussion to take place.
If it was a choice between no deal and no Brexit, where would you go now?
Well, I hope we won't get to that choice because Parliament has been very clear that it doesn't want to see no deal, but it's also clear that Parliament doesn't want to revoke the Article 50 notice that British people voted to leave. And although, people like Ian Duncan Smith, who I've just heard,
choice, but it might be the real
like to refer to people like me as Remainers, that's an unfair characterisation. We're people who may have voted Remain in the referendum, but have long since recognised that we need to leave the European Union, but insist that we must do so in a way that protects our economy and allows us to have the close relationship with the European Union that we promised the British people in our manifesto in the 2017 general election.
So you are going to go onto the back benches and you're going to campaign, along with other former cabinet ministers, I hear, to stop no deal happening.
Yes, to stop no deal happening on the 31st of October without the consent of Parliament. Look, this is a parliamentary democracy, and if the new Prime Minister can persuade Parliament to vote for a no deal exit, then I will have to accept that. This is a parliamentary democracy. But we can't have wheezes like suspending Parliament or proroguing Parliament in order to deny Parliament its voice. This matter must be decided in Parliament.
Last week, you abstained on an absolutely crucial vote, which in effect stops the new Prime Minister from easily proroguing Parliament.
That's right.
Did you have permission to do that?
No.
So you just decided you're going to vote or abstain against your own government on this matter?
Yes, so the government imposed a 3-line whip on Thursday, but the principle of collective responsibility is based on the principle of collective decision-making, and at no time did I join in a cabinet discussion or a write round that said the government should oppose a measure which merely and only seeks to ensure that Parliament is allowed to sit during October to do its job. I don't think we have a government policy that supports attempts to close Parliament down, and I certainly would not be prepared to support such a policy.
And it was also reported at the same time that you were encouraging other Conservative members to do the same thing by text. Was that true?
So a lot of my colleagues, some of whom have abstained or even voted against the government in the past, have, I think, legitimate interest in knowing what cabinet ministers are intending to do in a vote. Some of my cabinet colleagues have abstained in previous votes. I didn't. This is actually the first time I've ever defied a government whip in my a party whip in my 22 years in Parliament. But I thought it was right to tell other colleagues who'd expressed an interest what I intended to do, and I did so by text message on Thursday morning.
And it was further reported that you were talking to other parties as well, including Ian Blackford of the SNP, about that vote.
I talk to lots of people across Parliament all the time, and I would urge all of my colleagues to do so. Parliament works like that. There are conversations going on all the time.
Rather meanly, people used to call you Spreadsheet Phil.
So they did.
Are you going to be Phil Guevara now on the back benches running this revolt?
No, look, not at all. I want to be a loyal supporter of the next Conservative government. And if the next Conservative government can deliver a negotiated Brexit deal that protects our economy, then I will strongly support that government. And I hope it will be able to, because although Simon Coveney made clear the EU is not going to change its position on the withdrawal agreement, there's a lot more flexibility on the future relationship. And although Parliament will have the same arithmetic as it did under Theresa May, the fact of a new leader, the fact of the leader being someone who has a mandate from the party membership, being someone who is trusted by the Brexiteers, may make it easier for him to find a way through, and I very much hope he does, and he will have any support that I can give him, so long as he is genuinely seeking a negotiated deal.
In order to stop no deal happening, people are looking at the possible parliamentary mechanisms for doing that. And lots of clever people have been scratching their heads and trying to work out how it could be done and not coming up with many answers. One of the obvious answers is voting against the new Prime Minister in a vote of no confidence. I asked you, I think, about 7 times last time we talked what your position would be. I'm trying to find out how far you would go. Would you vote against a government determined to take us out without a deal on the 31st of October in a motion of no confidence?
Well, I don't think it will get to that. And while many clever people have been scratching their heads, parliamentary process is extraordinarily complex and sometimes arcane. I am confident that Parliament does have a way of preventing a no-deal exit on 31st of October without parliamentary consent. And I intend to work with others to ensure that Parliament uses its power to make sure that the new government can't do that. And the point of that is not to inflict some defeat on the new government. It's to ensure that the new government focuses then on trying to achieve a sensible, negotiated settlement with the EU that protects our economy and allows us all to get on with our lives.
That sounds to me as if you would not vote against in a vote of no confidence.
Well,
and that's why quite a lot of your colleagues suspect, if I may put it this way, that people like you will eventually crumble, that the prospect of a Corbyn Labour government, the prospect of John McDonnell taking the seat that you occupy in the Treasury is so horrific to Conservatives that in the end you will actually fold and you will back Boris Johnson whatever he does.
Well, that would be obviously a catastrophic outcome for the country if Corbyn and McDonnell were ever to get their hands on the levers of power. And as I just said to you, I don't have any major policy disagreements with Boris Johnson apart from on the issue of how we manage our exit from the European Union. So my focus will be on trying to persuade the new Prime Minister to work with those colleagues who are absolutely opposed to leaving on 31st of October with no deal, to give himself a bit more time, to do the work necessary to explore the options, and to use the power that he will have as a newly elected Prime Minister and a leader of the Brexiteers to get a sensible outcome.
I suppose what they say about you is that you never believed in no deal, you're always hostile to it. We now know that Theresa May never threatened no deal directly to Michel Barnier or the rest, and that because that was effectively taken off the table, that is why it has been so hard for us to get a workable deal from the EU.
That's total rubbish. But it is true that I've never believed in no deal. Of course I've never believed in no deal. No deal is a catastrophe for our country. That wasn't what the Brexiteers offered in the referendum. It wasn't what we as a party proposed in the 2017 general election.
But let me just show you what one of the very key members of the EU said about this to Panorama just a moment
ago. Do you think
This
Britain
was
was prepared for no deal?
No.
You seem very certain.
I'm very certain.
How so?
We have seen what has been prepared on our side of the border for a hard Brexit. We don't see the same level of preparation on the other side of the border.
Isn't that why they never felt under any pressure?
The EU's position was clear from the outset. The EU set its position right at the very beginning of this process. It has never moved from that position. And the reason to me is clear. It's not about ideology. It's about the fact that the EU is a fragile coalition of 27 member states. They've put that coalition position together. If they reopened it or tweaked it at all, it would fall apart. And that's why we've had to negotiate with a really very inflexible negotiating partner.
You've been very outspoken about your position. Do you think Theresa May basically agrees with you?
You'll have to ask Theresa May that question.